Well, hello and welcome to our next video. Now, when we left off the last time, the persecution of the Covenanters was increasing after the return of Charles II to the throne at the Restoration. So with this persecution on the rise and the government troops behaving badly, it was only a matter of time before the people would make a stand and things would come to a head. And this came about quite inadvertently on the morning of the 13th of November 1666. Some Covenanters had come into the small village of St John's town of Dumfries in Dumfries in Galloway, and they were enjoying some warm food when they heard news that nearby an old man was being threatened by the troops with being roasted on a red hot gridiron. Now, his crime was being unable to pay the fines that had been imposed on him for not attending the curate's church and instead listening to the field preachers. The Covenanters, when they heard this, came to his aid. They overpowered the dragoons, but during the scuffle, one of the dragoons was wounded. And here we have the first head-on clash between government troops and the Covenanters. And this small incident would eventually lead to a battle known as the Battle of Rullion Green, which I want to talk about in a bit more detail in this video. So the old man is freed, but the Covenanters know that they're in trouble for their actions. So they decide to take the commander of the dragoons, a man called Captain James Turner, hostage till they're able to air their grievances. They believe that having Turner in custody, they've got a better chance of being listened to and their complaints being heard. So they set off for Dumfries, where Turner is, and they arrive there on Thursday the 15th of November. Now, by this time there's about 180 of them. More people have came and joined them, and there's half of them on foot and half of them on horse. They go to the house that Turner is staying in, they wake him up and they take him prisoner. Turner himself would later say that all the time he was with them, the Covenanters, he was treated well. They then go to the town cross, the centre of the town in Dumfries, and to prove that this is not a rebellion and they're not rebels, they drink to the king's health. Now, none of this was planned. So after this, we find them wandering about the southwest of Scotland for the next few days. But all the time, more and more people are coming and joining them. People who's been suffering at the hands of the government troops and the fines and imprisonment. At Dalmellington in Ayrshire on the 18th, the Reverend John Welsh joins them, as does a young minister by the name of Hugh McHale. Now, just before his ejection in 1662, Hugh McHale had attacked the rulers of the land in a sermon, stating that the church in Scotland was being persecuted by a pharaoh on the throne, a Haman in the state, and a Judas in the church. And for that, he was a wanted man, but he managed to evade capture. By the 21st, they're now outside Ayr at the Bridge of Doon, and by this time, they're numbering about 700. And it's here that they gain some valuable military veterans who are able to help organise them. James Wallace, who had served as a colonel in Cromwell's army during the English Civil War, he joined them, along with Major Learmouth, a Captain Arnott, and a man called Captain John Peyton of Meadowhead, who would feature quite prominently in the story of the Covenanters, and himself would be martyred at the Grassmarket in Edinburgh. Officers are appointed to those on foot and on horse, and with a renewed vigour they march eastward towards Edinburgh. At the same time, General Tam Dalyell leaves Glasgow with around 3,000 government troops and heads south in pursuit of them. Now, the Covenanters march across the moors. They're going through Cumnock, through Muirkirk and on to Douglas, and it's at Douglas they stop and they discuss whether they should continue or whether they should disperse. But the overwhelming decision was to carry on. So they do. They proceed to Lanark, where they renew the covenant there. They also again drink the king's health and repeat that it's not a rebellion and that they're there simply in arms for self-defence. And it's at Lanark that their numbers are at their peak. There's around 1,200 men. But word reaches them at Lanark that DL and his men are fast approaching. So the Covenanters decide to make a rapid march towards Edinburgh. They march all night through a terrible storm. Early in the morning of the 27th of November, they reach Newbridge, a few miles from the city. They finally rest there, but fatigue, hunger and the horrendous weather has taken its toll, and their numbers have now shrunk to just under 900 men. It's also here, through ill health, that Hugh McHale is forced to leave them too, the Reverend Hugh McHale. They had hoped to receive some support in Edinburgh, but when they reached Collington, just outside the city, they were disturbed and disappointed to find out that they had no support and that the city has been fortified against them and armed militia on the walls. So they're disheartened and they're unable to get near the city to air their grievances, so they decide to return to the safety of the southwest. But DL and his men are blocking the route west, so they decide to head south over the Pentland hills towards Biggar. They use the safety of the hills to camp there for the night because it's getting late. But the next morning, the 28th of November, DL's army catches up with them, and so the Covenanters take up position, a defensive position on the south slope of a ridge at a place called Rullion Green. DL's troops take up position opposite. Twice they launch an attack on the Covenanters, and twice they're repulsed. But they're outnumbered 3-1, the Covenanters, and on the third attack they're completely routed. The majority of the Covenanters do, however, manage to escape up into the Pentland Hills, off into the darkness and the mist. Around 50 Covenanters are killed and around 100 surrender or are captured and taken to Edinburgh. Those that had surrendered had done so upon the promise that they would be treated as soldiers and therefore given quarter. But Archbishop James Sharp and the prelates insist on making an example of them. He actually told those Covenanters that although they had their lives given them on the field as soldiers, this did not prejudge their trial in law as subjects. So many of them are executed. Their heads are removed and sent to their hometowns as a warning to others. Hands are chopped off and sent to Lanark Tolbooth because it's there where they renewed the covenant. Some were sent, not executed in Edinburgh, but actually sent to their own towns, such as Ayr, Irvine and Dumfries, to be executed there. And others are just hunted down and picked off on their way home by the troops in the days that followed. Hugh McHale, he's also killed as well. He had been arrested on his way to his father's house. He was imprisoned and tortured on a very cruel device known as the boot. This boot was a brace that went down the bottom half of the leg, and wedges are hammered in the top and the bottom to crush the bone, causing excruciating pain. They tried to get him to say that the rising wasn't spontaneous, it was actually a conspiracy and premeditated, which it wasn't. But anyway, he was sentenced to be executed. But as he went up the scaffold with his mangled leg, his bravery and his composure was just such an inspiration to many. He said that every rung of the ladder he goes up is one step closer to heaven. And his last words on the scaffold were, "Farewell, mother, father, friends and relations. Farewell the world and its delights. Farewell meat and drink. Farewell sun, moon and stars. Welcome God and Father. Welcome sweet Jesus Christ, the mediator of the new covenant. Welcome blessed Spirit of grace, the God of all consolation. Welcome glory. Welcome eternal life. Welcome death. Into thy hands I commit my spirit." So this was an inspiration for many who watched. Now, after Rullion Green, the next few years saw a change in the way the government handled this situation, and there was a period of respite. There were several indulgences which were offered to the Covenanter ministers, which caused a split. Some accepted them, and the stricter preachers refused. In 1670, Robert Leighton, who was the Bishop of Dunblane, and 6 other Episcopalians travelled to the west of Scotland to try and persuade the people to accept a mix of Presbyterianism and Episcopalianism. A man called Gilbert Burnet, who was Professor of Theology at Glasgow University, was one of those who was sent. And he would later write about how amazed he was that even the common people, the poorest among them, knew so much about how the church should be organised and that the church should be Presbyterian, and that they were even able to back up their arguments with God's word, with the Bible. Now there was a flip side to this softer approach, because for those that didn't accept him, the punishment increased. Those who went to these open air conventicles could be put in prison and fined. Anyone found organising or preaching at a conventicle could face death. However, these field meetings, conventicles, increased throughout the 1670s, and some of them were very large, several thousand people attending some of them. Now, some of those who went to these conventicles also started to bring weapons as well to defend themselves if they were attacked. In 1678, the Scottish Government gave orders for the assembling of 2,000 to 3,000 regular troops and a force of 6,000 to 7,000 Highlanders, who were mostly Roman Catholic Highlanders. Now, the Duke of Lauderdale said the reason for this was in case the fanatics should rise in arms, and we must take this opportunity to crush them, so that they may trouble us no more. And this Highland host, as these Highlanders became known, were brutal in their treatment of the people in the south, and they performed many atrocious acts. When they were withdrawn after a short time, they crossed the bridge at Stirling like a victorious army. They were laden down with all the possessions that they'd stole from the people in the south. But as the Highlanders left, another persecutor comes onto the scene, John Graham of Claverhouse. He was sent to Dumfriesshire in 1678 to deal with these large conventicles and to deal with those who were attending them. And the following year, he will be at the forefront of the next clash between the Covenanters and the government troops. And that's where we're going to pick it up the next time, 1679, because it's a very important year and a lot happened in that year. So that's where we'll pick up from in the next video. So thanks again, and we'll bring the next video to you shortly. Thank you.